very briefly give each of our panelists an opportunity for a quick closing statement. And I want to start by saying that I set this up to talk a little bit about what all of you could do to help end the war in Afghanistan, which at this point is the longest war the United States has fought. We have an opportunity, particularly between now and November, to change the debate in this country. And if you remember only a few things from today's panel, I would like you to remember the following. We are spending $100 billion a year to chase 50 members of Al-Qaeda, while we are laying off hundreds of thousands of teachers and talking about cutting Social Security. That's the choice that we're making. The more we can help the American people understand that that is the choice we are making, the more we can apply pressure to members of Congress and to this administration to reconsider the course that they're on, which is clearly not accomplishing things that are in the best interest of the United States. Ben, did you want to go next?
Yeah, just a couple points, and yes, thanks very much for this panel and all of you for being here. I mean, the key point I'd like to make about the counterinsurgency strategy, and particularly lessons we can draw from the surge in Iraq, which was, I mean, one of the driving arguments behind the surge in Afghanistan was this idea that the surge in Iraq had been successful, and I think, clearly the Iraq surge coincided and in some ways helped bring down security, and I think our military deserves credit for that. However, there were a number of other factors in Iraq that created the conditions for the drop in security, and I think this goes to the point that success, such as it is unrelated to decisions that the United States makes. So to imagine that the United States is going to continue spending $100 billion in Afghanistan until we reach a point where things happen that are out of our control so we can declare victory and begin drawing down, I just find that unacceptable. We need to create a narrative, and we need to make arguments that involve the United States defining when and how we leave Afghanistan. We have to leave responsibly, but nonetheless, I think it has to be our decision. And again, I would like to place it within this broader idea, as I said earlier, about demilitarizing the way that we engage in the world. And I think Afghanistan could be an area where we see how that really looks on the ground.
I endorse what Matt just said. There's a program called the Project on National Security Reform. They have produced an 800-page dead letter document that is sitting in a drawer in Washington, D.C. And what we need to do is retool the national security architecture of the United States so the best and brightest in all arenas of what the United States does so well is able to deploy and perform mentor duties, assistance duties, educational duties in Afghanistan and other countries, and to unweight the U.S. military, to bring the U.S. military into its core competencies. And if you need to develop judiciary, then our judicial system, with its absolutely stunning capacity to do right, can deploy to Afghanistan and help us out and get the judicial system out of the hands of Taliban and into the hands of local and national government. So it's fixed the national security architecture of the United States so that we unweight the military.
Primarily, and I'm new to this kind of scene. This is my first ever type of political convention. But I'm assuming most of you are activists or some form of blogger or involved. So my encouragement would stem basically to, I remember being in Anbar in fall of '06, it was a complete mess. And every once in a while I would see a TV, and the debate was going on in the U.S. about the Iraq War. Now, the level of debate you can see on television, and again, this is like every couple of weeks you see something new. It was nothing greater than two kids yelling at each other on the schoolyard. That's the level of maturity that the folks in D.C. were seeking to show. But I would, besides all the rational arguments, you can make about, hey, Al-Qaeda's not there, our troop presence does not have an effect on a worldwide mafia-like organization. Our strategy is counterproductive. We've been doing this for a bunch of years. It's been 5 years of getting worse. This idea that it's going to get better before it gets worse. Well, it's been 5 years now. When does the better part start? I would just ask you to remember the human cost of it. I'm sure General Eaton has the same experiences like a lot of you all in the audience, you know, I had one of those open up in the New York Times yesterday, and there's a name I know. You know, a kid who had been with my Marines 10 years ago in Japan. You know, he's dead now. He got married, had 2 kids. Actually, one's not born yet. So there's a human cost to this that I think escapes a lot of the American public. I forget where I saw the number, but it said something like only about 10 million Americans have any type of emotional connection to Afghanistan, out of a population of 300 million. So if you all are involved in this, I would encourage you to keep that. Make your arguments rational and intellectual, but keep in the back of your mind the human cost of this and whether or not it's worth it.
In Tuesday's New York Times, there was a story about how a panel in London is assessing what happened, the run-up to the invasion of Iraq, and their former director of their FBI, MI5, who was there from 2002 to 2007, said that in fact, Iraq, the invasion of Iraq and the engagement in Afghanistan is making Britain and the West much less safe, much more dangerous. It's not making us more secure, it's making us less secure. And then on the page adjoining that story was a story about how in states all across this country, the movement for independent living for disabled people is being rolled back. I was involved in the disability rights movement years ago. This is the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the basic investments that allow people to leave institutions and live lives of independence and dignity is being rolled back because of the budget cuts that are being forced upon all of these states, because the Congress is instead sending $100 billion plus interest over territories like Afghanistan. And so whether it's the impossible situation we're putting our young people in Afghanistan, or the devastation to the things that we care so much about and have fought for here at home, the stakes could not be higher. And if there's anything that I would leave with folks, I go back to my beginning comment. We need to have a very engaged anti-war movement that is making it clear to the progressives across this country and in Congress that we are active, we are aware, and we're not going away. You know, when we had to run up to the war in Iraq, we did a thing that tried to get the attention of the Congress. We asked people to call the Senate in one single day. It was called the Virtual March on Washington. And we had people sign up on the website and said, at this particular minute at 10:02, would you call one senator, and at 10:06 call another senator? Well, people signed up, the word spread, things happened, and on that day, over 1 million people called the Senate in one single day to say, don't invade Iraq. We have enormous power as a movement. We have the majority of the American people with us. We have issues that we care about and values that are desperately important. We need to put all that to work and fight like we've never fought before. Thank you.
And so to close, and actually building off of something Congressman Andrews said, I work with members of Congress on a daily basis, and I was in about 2.5 months ago talking to Congressman McGovern, who has been one of the real leaders in the United States House of Representatives on ending this war. And he told me something that really shocked me. He said that every day his office gets calls about the economy. Every day his office gets calls about energy policy and ending our dependence on oil. Every day his office gets calls about whatever random suspension bills they're working on this week. But that in the 60-day period prior to me going to talk to him, he had gotten fewer than a dozen calls about ending the war in Afghanistan. And this is someone who's one of the leaders of the anti-war movement in Congress. They're not hearing from us. They do not believe that the American people want them to end this war because we're not talking to them. And so they continue to send money to pay for troops at the same time that they say we can't afford to pay for teachers, and we can't afford to pay for unemployment, and we can't afford to pay for health insurance. And we can't afford to keep the promises we've made for Social Security. And everyone in this room can have an impact on that. Ask people to call, whether they're calling the White House or they're calling Congress, because at the end of the day, the White House has to take the calls from members of Congress. Even if Congress doesn't have an immediate action that they can take, asking them to apply pressure to the White House will make a difference. We've been there for far too long with no exit strategy, and it's time for us to end this. Thank you so much for coming today.